So one thing I'll say to every person who's ever thought to do game development, if you've never done game development, what you do is you say to yourself, man, I have a really cool idea. I really want to make this story come to life, and it would be best suited for a game. 99% of people who think that are absolutely wrong. The best games that have ever been created actually rarely start with the story in the game solely, but they normally start with Well, hello there, good people of the Super Agile Nation. It's your boy, Bradson Henry. You already know what it is. Just trying to make it happen another day in the Super Agile world. But you know, I'm never doing this alone. Yes, the Agile
We all
world.
live
In the Super Agile world. Thank you. But, you know, I'm never alone. I always got a player 2 and a 3. But today we only got a player 2. So first, let me just introduce the boy, Kyle. What's happening, brother Kyle? How are you doing, sir?
What's going on? Hey, it's happening, you know? It's a good day. Got some good weather today. Happy to be here, as usual.
Yeah, you know, I mean, shout out to good weather, because for some people, I know some of y'all out there might have been impacted by the Hurricane Ian. I hope you're doing well. You're safe. Me and my family, we were impacted a little bit. But when I say a little bit, like, it came by us, but we barely lost power. Nothing big, but, you know, it was rainy and windy. So we're doing good. So I appreciate all the people who've sent, hey, how are you doing? Checking in. We are doing safe and we are well. And I hope the same for y'all. But as you might have already noticed, we're missing one of the brothers. We're missing the brother Steve. Brother Steve. So this is going to be one of them duo, because, I mean, Steve basically said that he just wasn't feeling it. He didn't like y'all. And that he just...
It was personal.
You know, like, once we hit episode 50, he started realizing, like, how much he dislikes everybody who listens to this podcast. And it's kind of
something about the whole situation being beneath him.
Yes.
And he can't tolerate it anymore.
Yes. You know, he said his favorite phrase, these plebeians or something to that extent. You know, they're lesser than me. They have... dirty blood or something like that. I don't know what that was all about, but
Muggles, I think.
Muggles. Yes, exact terminology I believe he used. So you know what? Me and Kyle, we love our Muggle boys and girls out there, so no hate, but
represent.
You know, Steve just felt like he needed time away from y'all. No, we're not gonna play Steve like that. You know, he's just I don't want to say incapacitated. That's not the right word.
He's incarcerated.
He's incarcerated, you know, in a jail of his own making. But yeah, he just can't. He just can't make it. So yeah, it's just us boys today, us brothers, myself and Kyle. So we got a special treat because this is something we were talking about, trying to figure out how to do at some point. Because one of our great friends, great listeners, one of the homies in the Discord, one of the homies in real life, the boy Vanta, aka in Marcus, we go way back, but Marcus threw out a while back. He just was like, hey, I have a suggestion for an episode. He said it'd be cool to hear a little bit about, you know, stuff on the game dev side. We've mentioned in the past that Kyle and myself, we have not just dabbled in game development, but we've done quite a bit in game dev. And he was just asking, like, hey, like, what's your origin story? How'd you get started? And what are some of the tools out there going on? How's it changed over the landscape changed for game dev over the years? And we figured it'd be cool to talk about it. It's something we always love talking about. So it's going to be fun. You ready for this, Kyle? You ready?
I'm ready to get into it. Yeah, I've been looking forward to this one because I remember when he first posted that, I was like, man, that would be an awesome thing to talk about. Just because, we're so deep into it. And we can just talk at length about it. So hopefully this won't be a 5-hour episode. But
yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Get into it.
I agree. So I guess what we'll start out with is just me and Kyle sharing a little bit about our background into game dev. What I will say is that this will definitely be, I think, a condensed version. Definitely on my end, I assume the same for Kyle. There's a lot of things that happen, I think, for us both that got us into game dev and that continues in game dev. But I definitely would love to share my story, and I'd love to hear Kyle's. I've heard quite a bit of it, but it'd be cool to hear it again. So
Yeah, go for it, man.
So I started off. Okay, cool. Well, super long story short, I went to school. I graduated with a degree in mechanical engineering. Worked for a while and realized it wasn't for me. And this is way back in, oh my goodness, 2011. Wow, It's been over a decade. And I just knew that I needed to figure something out, but I didn't know what I wanted to do. And I knew that I was a creative, like 100%. Like from day one, everything that I've like done that I felt I was proud of has come from a creative part of me. You know, if it's making music and beats with my friends, or break dancing, or doing graffiti for a little bit. Yeah, I did that. Ooh. That's a whole nother story.
But I know about that one.
Yeah, that's one of them things. That's a whole other story.
Around here tagging
today. But I knew I was a creative, but you know, like I think mechanical engineering is definitely creative, but I figured I wasn't really finding my outlet in that. And I felt like I was slowly dying inside. Matter of fact, quickly dying inside. So I just started pursuing what would be my thing. And I've shared this story with a lot of people, but there was a time where I thought I wanted to be an after school counselor, or after school like program, like for kids, like program director. But I realized that like I'm the worst person, because I'm the person that will tell children, hey, you should throw firecrackers into the bathroom. You should because I don't know. I think it's funny. And I know for the most part, you're not really going to get hurt, but that's probably not the best thing to do.
It's vandalism.
I'm like the worst person. I'm telling kids to go, hey, you should go kick that guy. You know where to kick him. like really.
Where did you kids get this idea?
Don't tell them it came from me. That's always. So anyway, I did, just on a whim, just was thinking about all the things I love doing, and games. I mean,
games.
Half of the episodes we do on this podcast are about games, and
well over half.
Well over half.
It is not balanced whatsoever.
We're trying to be better. But also, like, I've always been deep into games. I think I mentioned this before. I used to read Game Informers, like front to cover to cover, like every game that's coming out. I'd watch everything that I possibly could, even when I didn't have access to it. So there's a lot of games I've never played, but I know everything about. So I was like, man, let me get into game dev. Long story short is I realized, I have zero skills for this, but I want to really figure this out. I did research, and I ended up going to GDC on a whim, like with a resume, and going, I'm gonna get me a job in game dev because I already got a college degree. I'm good, son. It didn't work out that way. So
real life.
I went there, and I at this point I had done nothing in game dev, nothing. I just had my resume and some dreams. I go to GDC, first time going to San Francisco, went by myself. Didn't really have that much money, so I just was kind of like low key as possible. I go to they had a career fair. I go up, and I think I was at Ubisoft booth. Ubisoft. Ooh. It wasn't Blizzard, because Blizzard's was super long. And I was at Ubisoft, and they had multiple lines. And what would happen is you wait in line, and you get to run into a recruiter. I showed the recruiter my resume, and I can never forget this, because she looked at me, and she was like, wow, this is one of the worst resumes I've ever seen.
Oh my gosh.
She's like, there's nothing on here that's useful. I don't know what I would do with you. I don't know what. She was just super honest and super blunt.
Man, she was real.
And she was like, I couldn't hire you for anything. And I was like, what? And I was like, what do you mean? She's like, these skills have no application in our industry. You need to start from square one. Bam. It hit hard, like a train, like a freight train, son. But
that's a pivotal moment, man.
I actually emailed her not too long after, and I thanked her for that moment, because it changed everything. It changed everything. From that moment, I said, I gotta grind. I gotta learn. Yeah. And
that'll get you on track.
Yeah. And so really that got me into game dev. And from that point, and I could talk a little bit more about some of the stuff that I actually did when we talk a little bit more about like our story. But I basically just Google searched how to make a game. At this point, like, things like Lynda and Udemy,
yeah.
And didn't exist. The only things that really existed, Skillshare didn't exist. YouTube wasn't really the place,
no brackies
for learning or anything. None of that existed. somebody just told me about Coursera, which was just getting started. And that was like computer science from like MIT and stuff like that. Let's just say I never completed any of those courses. And then the other was just random blogs that people had about random stuff. And that's my first game was written in C#. I'm sorry, did I say C#? I wish. C++, using an engine called SDL. And I still have the game. It's called the Pepper of Destiny. I can't remember what it's called. But
Pepper of Destiny.
I'll share it with you one day, Kyle. It's so
Drop that boy in the Discord.
I was no, that was my second game. My first game was called Noja. And it was a play off of Jonah. And it was gonna be a retelling of Jonah, but in this alternate universe.
Oh wow.
It was so bad, but I still think I have it. But anyway, so that's my story, and so much has happened after that, but we can maybe talk more about that. But that's how I got started in game dev. That's my story.
Nice.
And I'm sticking to it.
That's a good story. Yeah, I want to hear the rest of it. I had no idea about Noja and the pepper that could.
Yes.
Whatever the
Project Chef of Fire. That's what it was called. Project Chef of Fire. Yeah.
Man. So I had, I guess, similar origins in the fact that I did play a lot of games growing up. There was actually one of my friend's dad. He would call us game heads because I'd always go over to his son's house and we'd play Smash Bros for hours and hours and hours. But before that, I'd play with my parents. We had a Super Nintendo in the house, and so I was just enamored from a very young age. I was just captivated by anything that had to do with animation.
Yeah,
and video games are just full of lights and sounds and things moving around and zip zapping. But the difference was that you're controlling this animation. And I was like, oh, that's another level. And so, as I grew up, I used to make like comic books, and I would make stop motion animations with my phone. And then eventually I kind of moved over into, trying to put these things together. So, I played Yu-Gi-Oh! A lot when I was a kid. And so I was like, how can I make what I see on TV, these animations? How can I make this into a game of my own? So I just made like bootleg Yu-Gi-Oh! Cards, which was my first like full step into any sort of game making.
Wait, so how old were you at this point?
I was around probably 13.
13, wow.
Mm-hmm. I had a friend that lived around the corner whose family had more money than mine, sort of. They would buy him more Yu-Gi-Oh! Cards, so he had all the cool ones. And I could never play against him, and so I had the idea of, why don't we make our own to level out the playing field? And we had this whole setup where, we just throw all the cards in a bag, and you draw them from there. It was a pretty fun game. In retrospect, I'm sure it was trash. And the balancing,
it's probably terrible.
The balancing was completely terrible. And so then a couple of years later in high school, they started offering this program. It was just called programming. It was like another elective aside from the computer class you would take. Mm-hmm. And they said that there was a little bit of game dev involved. And I was like, I've never done anything game development wise. And I played RuneScape up to this point and stuff like that. So I've been interested. And that was when Flash games were huge and everywhere. And so that's how they marketed it. Use the engine people use for Flash games. And so we learned about Flash, as well as getting introduced to Multimedia Fusion 2.
Wow.
Now, this was the program, man. So have you heard of Five Nights at Freddy's?
Me? Oh, yeah. That's the... Everybody know about Five Nights. And if you don't...
So click...
Now you know.
Yeah. Well, you might not want to look it up if you don't know, because it's kind of creepy. But just a little disclaimer. But so that game was made in Click Team Fusion, which is the company that made Multimedia Fusion.
Really?
So it's like this weird interlink in that. Yeah. And so, but it's this 2D engine with like a visual coding language you can write in script. I forgot the language that they actually use, but if you didn't want to use all that stuff, then you go to like this screen with all these blocks, and you click on the block and you can type in function type things. And it was super easy to use for like kids. And so, after I went through that program, what really kind of got me was I had a whole lot of fun in that program, but I didn't have access to what I was doing at school at home. And the professor, a teacher, I guess. It was kind of like a lunch lady who just had to be in there because it was an elective class. But so we had the disc, but there was like 6 discs, and they would use the same disc on the computers because you just had to have the login code in order to make the disc work. And she was like, "Hey, if you want to take this disc home, you can."
Oh.
And I was like, "For real?" And so I never brought it back.
I robbed the school.
And so I brought it with me to college. And so I studied animation in college. And so throughout learning, more things about animation, I was also building games in Multimedia Fusion. And so I built a handful of games and had people test them in my classes and stuff. Learned a little bit about 3D. And then that, it's just history from there about just me diving into different engines. Eventually got to Unity. And we can get deeper into that. But that's kind of like what started me off. It's just like every so often I just take another little incremental step, trying something different, and yeah, the rest is kind of history.
I love that there's a part in the story where it's like, you're like, man, I love kind of doing this, but how do I go further? And your teacher is like, I see you had something in you, child. You can take this home with you, and maybe you can change the world.
And the prophecy started.
No, it's so interesting that, you got me thinking about like my past, even before that point, that pivotal point after college and like me working. Because now thinking back, I think game development and this world of just game design and making things for people to play has always been a part of me. But I've just never thought of it as something that I could do. I don't know if, I don't even know if this, because I know you said you didn't get cable until later, like, or something, right?
I was in high school.
I don't know if you ever saw these commercials. I was kind of in high school, middle school. I don't know how old I was. I just remember seeing them on TV, normally on Saturday. It was these commercials where they were telling you to go to like school for games. And it would be like this, like, no disrespect, but like this kind of overweight, like nerdy looking dude on a couch in a dimly lit room playing a game. And then like maybe a commercial would come on and be like, "Hey, you." And he'd be like, "Huh? You on the couch." And you're like, "Huh? Me?" He's like, "Yeah, you like playing games, don't you?" And he's like, "Yeah, I love them." He's like, "Well, it's time for you to stop playing games and start making them." And then it would be like this weird like infomercial commercial about how you could go to school to make games.
Yeah.
But to be very honest, like, I don't want to make it. I'm trying to be very, I'm going to be real. It just never seemed like it ever represented me and people who look like me. Right.
That's real.
I just saw it as like, oh, this is not a thing for young black kid on the east side of Atlanta. This is something for, everybody else, or a specific group.
All that stuff always seems so mystical.
Yeah, it seemed like impossible to me. Even though there's these commercials saying, "Hey, you could do it," it didn't seem like it was you. It was like that other guy can do it.
Yeah, the guy in the commercial.
The guy in the commercial. The guy who looks like the guy in the commercial. But not me. And then also, I didn't know anybody in computer science or in any kind of creative anything. Like the most creative thing that I knew somebody did in my like family is like one of my aunts owned a wig shop. Like,
oh wow, man.
So to me, I was like, oh, that's really cool. She owns her own business, but like most of my family, like, were like professional career, working different things. So, or just doing what they got to do to get by. So it seemed impossible, but kind of going back, sorry, I just went on a tangent. But as a kid, I always loved making up games for me and my friends to play. Like, they're like, I would like, kind of, it's funny you talk about Yu-Gi-Oh! Because there's a time where me and my best friend at the time, Corey, we would play, we were playing Yu-Gi-Oh! But I didn't have any Yu-Gi-Oh! Cards. And my parents, I don't think they would even buy me the starter deck. It was like $60 or something crazy. But my brother, who was older than me, had some Magic cards that he bought when he was in high school. And me and my friend Corey, we would play this new version of the game with Yu-Gi-Oh cards and Magic cards over the phone.
Oh, wow.
And we created unique rule sets and we created all this
Over the
stuff
phone.
over the
Trust.
phone, you know, like, and it was really hard. I won't lie, not to cheat, but it was like, it kind of took the fun away. Like, I'm trying to beat, like, I wanted to know I beat him. You know, maybe he cheated, but it never seemed like he did because sometimes
that
I would
online multiplayer.
Yeah, you know. So, and also like me and my friends, we were like, I'd play basketball and stuff. And during the summers, we'd be playing basketball or wall ball, where you throw a tennis ball against the wall and try to catch it, and then you peg each other. And then I would be like, yo, let's try this new game. And I remember I created a game where it was like a box on the ground, and you had to throw the tennis ball, but you had to like tackle each other. And one of the guys named Michael, he got hit so hard by one of the other guys that he got the wind knocked out of him. Ooh. And we thought he was dying. Like, we thought he was straight up dying. We never experienced this before. We were young. And I never made like another game.
Oh, snap.
Because I was like, I'm not trying to kill people. It just freaked me out.
Games hurt people.
Yeah, so I always kept it to, you know. And then like when I would be a part of groups, like my church group, my friend group, whatever, like if we were ever hanging out, I'd be the guy that came up with some crazy game. Or for a church like Wednesday night thing, I'd make up a game, you know, for us to play, or a icebreaker game, a brand new thing. I always do this, but I never thought of it as game design. I just thought of it as something fun. And I'd always think about the different types of players. Like, okay, we're going to have older people, younger people. We're going to have women. We're having men. We have people who've never played.
Accessibility, too.
I was thinking about accessibility. Oh, some people don't really understand the basic rules of games. So how do I make a game that's accessible depending on your skill set? You know, like, exactly. And how do I make sure that they can get in the game immediately? Because if people lose interest, they won't want to do, you know? So I was just doing this.
Matchmaking.
You know?
You got it all going.
But I never thought of it as game design. You know what I'm saying?
Wow. Yeah.
So it's just hearing your story just reminded me of that. Like, wow, you know, I guess I've been kind of doing this, but never thought of it that way, you know?
Been a game dev all along.
For real.
Yeah, it's putting that stuff together. I mean, it takes, I guess it's easy to underestimate how much goes into, especially when you play a game that you don't like or you think that's really silly. You know, if the game functions, somebody worked on that. Mm-hmm. And so it's really easy to underestimate how much time goes into, you know, a physical game, which maybe you buy props and you do in person. But, you know, to build a game out in an engine is like a step above that in a way, because you have to speak a language to create something in a language that other people can read on the other side of it, which is the user experience. Yeah. And the user interface. And, you know, you have to think, you always have to be kind of like one step ahead when you're creating a game, because you're not doing it for you. Mm-hmm. You're doing it for others to experience, and you have to like be in their shoes while also wearing the development hat. So it's a lot of juggling. Yeah. It's such a strange, it's so hard to, like, once you get into game dev for real and you start thinking, like, you start making your first game, you start to realize how something you take for granted, Super Mario Bros. You know? Oh, yeah. How much complex work, thinking, creative problem solving, like technical, you know, you just don't realize all these different pieces to create something that you just play with your friends, you know? And I think that to me was like the most humbling thing, and also made me have a lot of appreciation, even for the most trash games. I'll still clown them and make fun of them. But I do know, even for you to get to the point where I can play it is a miracle in and of itself, you know? At least it was, and that was especially before the days of like asset flips, when the framework was built for you. You know, you would download a full packaged game, and then maybe you'd change out one or two things. But yeah, before that, you know, when people uploaded games to whatever platform, there was always a process involved that you have to build the game first. When you press play, the game not immediately crash, and then you have to export it to the correct format for whatever the platform is, and then distribute it and make sure it works on other people's hardware. Yeah, like even for the garbage and the shovelware, an extensive amount of effort. You know. Yeah, 'cause I remember the actually the first game development. It was a lesson that I learned while learning Multimedia Fusion 2 was actually to create a walk cycle for a character and make them move. And like going back to what you said about taking things for granted. So first off, there's a very distinct correlation between the way a character looks and the way a character feels to play as them. And so it was a super simple character. It was like a circle with 2 legs. And he had, you just had to make him take steps. And it was like, they show you the video. You just do this, add a keyframe here, then rotate it here at the hip joint. And it's like, okay, I could do this. But it was the only lesson for the whole semester. And so I completely underestimated. I was like, I could do this in a week. Why are we spending the whole time on this? Bro, at the end of that semester, my man's leg was like wrapping around 360 degrees.
Yeah.
And then my inputs, they weren't working. Trying to get him to go across the screen. Didn't want to do it. Physics were completely jank. Like, it felt bad. It looked bad. And I spent hours on this.
Yeah.
And that's like a humbling moment, is when you legitimately try to make something and it seems so simple, but then you fail at it.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's like a pivotal moment. It's like, in that moment, you can either choose and say, okay, this is way too hard. It's my bad for underestimating it. I quit. Or you can say, this is tough. It's going to take some grit, but it'll be worth it, to really figure out how to make this thing work.
Yeah, it made me think of a question that you kind of already answered, but you might have another one. I was going to ask you, and I guess I'll answer now, and maybe you can think of something else, but what is something that you underestimated in game dev that you now have a lot of respect for people when they do it? And that is an example of walk animations, making character controllers, stuff like that. But so I'll say out of this, and maybe you have another one, is the thing that I think that I've 100% never had a second thought of, never even considered the complexity in, is just simply a menu system.
Yeah.
It is so hard. If you've never developed a game before, if you've never had to consider, and some people who work in development in general might have an inkling of what I'm mentioning. But to be honest, I've made UIs, user interfaces, in, actual development outside of games. And I still think that game development UIs are more complex sometimes.
Oh, absolutely.
Because so first, for those who are not super familiar, your UI is basically, or menu is just how you interface with the game before you start playing the game, right? You load up the
start
game
button.
Yeah, you press
options.
start, and then it shows all the stuff. Oh, do you want to start a new game? Do you want to continue? Do you want to go to settings? Do you want to do this and do that, right?
Yeah.
And then there's also this element that comes from game dev where the menu has to actually feel like something, not just operate. It needs to feel like a thing, because for a person who's starting your game, that's the first thing they experience.
Yeah, first impression. Yeah,
first impression. Rarely, I don't know if I've played. Maybe I've in the past. I'd have to think of one of a game that you plug it in, turn it on, goes through the intros, and then it just drops you in the game. You always
Limbo, I think, is like that.
Yeah, there's, but it's rare.
Usually those really artsy games, super rare, because
rare.
It's hard to do.
And because you need to give the person, you have to onboard them slightly. Hey, what do you want to do? Hey, do you need to change any settings? Hey, are you aware of this? Hey, hey, the person might have turned the game on, but walked out the room, because of whatever reason. But yeah, that whole process of, okay, how do I put stuff on the menu? How do I make it feel good? How do I make it represent the game that I'm going to play? How do I actually navigate from the menu to the actual game and then back to the menu? How do I have settings? How do I put the headings? Where do I put it? That blew my mind. I spent so much time when I first started doing game dev. I started making my game and I said, oh wait, I need to make a menu. 20 days later, I'm still working on this menu. Haven't worked on the game. So for me, I feel like that's one of those things that I completely underestimated. In game dev.
I 100% agree, because not only does the menu have to be functional on its own, but when especially if you're in options and settings and stuff, it actually is manipulating the game on the backside. So it has to be connected. And so it's when you can build the menu first to where you can get into the game, but you're going to have to come back to it periodically, or at least at the end of the game, to make sure, okay, this is the volume adjustment, this is the difficulty adjustment, and then very rarely, especially now in games, are the menus not like layered or like nested. Because I remember a couple of weeks ago, I was recording some B-roll for our YouTube videos. We were playing Mario Kart, and I started it before I got through all the menus, and it was like 6 different screens for us to just play a Grand Prix. But it's like all the decisions that this thing is making, based on me just hitting A, me taking it for granted. It's like somebody painstakingly went through this, and I'm just going through it in an instant. And the only time, in my opinion, and this is kind of maybe it's a hot take, but maybe it's kind of true. Really, the only time we notice menus is if something's wrong with them.
Yes.
Like if the background is a JPEG that's scaled up and in the wrong resolution, that's the first thing you're gonna see. If the start button, you keep tapping it, it doesn't do anything. Yeah. And so like, going back to what you said about the first impressions, like there's a whole lot of effort because that's a make or break. If like legitimately, it sets the tone.
Yeah. I don't know how many times this has happened. So me and Kyle, we had a series called Scratch the Itch back in the day. And, basically Scratch the Itch, what we do is we go to itch.io and we basically choose semi-randomly games to play, right? And one thing we would do is that I would choose a game for Kyle to play. So Kyle would be unaware of the game, but I would choose it. But in order for me to give it to Kyle, I had to at least make sure that it booted up, because I've learned that not all games actually work even if it loads in. Like Kyle said, if you press start and nothing happens, it's the worst possible experience. And there's a game behind that that menu, but something broke in the publishing process, and you're like, well, I'll never know what that game is.
Now the menu is impeding you from the experience.
Yeah, I think like one of the things that game dev has taught me is an absolute like resilience. Because and me and Kyle can talk about some of the games we made together, and like some of the things we've run into. But I know that there's been times where I've run into issues, maybe with manipulating AI in a particular way, or wanting some type of hitbox to work a specific way, or trying to get somebody to just land on the ground and not jettison themselves through the landscape in some weird situation that I can't figure out, where I felt like game dev was going to break me. And I feel like, when I hear people say like they really feel like game development is purely a passion, something that they have to do, I get it. Because I feel like you can't casually do game dev. Like you can say that. Like I don't know how many people I've met who's like, oh yeah, I want to do game dev for fun. Like, and I'm like, cool. Just to let you know, it's not fun. Like, it's not fun. It's an absolutely like a back-breaking process. Even the smallest of things,
it will wreck you.
Yeah, Oh, so I was gonna ask you, do you remember what the first? Do you remember the first game that you ever shared with somebody else? Like either semi-blindly, like, hey, check this out, I made it, or somebody who's aware of what you're doing, but they'd never played it before. Like, do you remember the first time you did that, and what game it was?
I do, but I also didn't answer your last question, though.
Oh,
so
yes,
I'll answer that one first, and then if you want to comment on what I'm going to say, which you may have thought, then I'll circle back and answer the other one. So my thing that I picked that I underestimated, which was probably a foolish underestimation, but partially I blame it on just how well game developers have done in this area, is game cameras.
Ooh, yo, let me just say this, Kyle, before you continue.
Go ahead.
There's a reason that in most of the games that me and Kyle make, I let Kyle deal with that. Like, I'm a developer, like, for real. But I genuinely have, like anytime we do a game date, I'm like, all right, Kyle, you can handle the character controller and the camera stuff. I have no desire. Yeah, go ahead. Continue.
Because I've been through the fire for both of those, but everything else, yeah. So that's why our dynamic works, is because I'll handle that dumb stuff, and then you handle the other dumb stuff, like stuff actually working when people touch stuff and stuff. Yeah, I don't want to touch any of that. But anyway, so yeah, the camera, because you remember back in the day, if you had camera control at all, it was like on the bumpers or on the triggers, and it'd be like a quick swivel or something. It'd go behind the character. But typically it was just the camera would follow you or it'd be stuck to a track and you didn't have any control over it. The people were outraged because like, man, this camera's terrible.
Mm-hmm.
And then we got spoiled because as 3D platformers came out and shooters came out where the cameras got remarkably better, they wouldn't clip through walls. They wouldn't be unnecessarily underneath your character when you're platforming or something. Like you actually see where you're jumping. And it's like, okay, so it must be easy now because people figured it out. But then there were still games coming out that had janky characters. Yeah. There still are games
to this day
coming out to this day that have janky cameras. And it's one of the biggest gripes I see from like games journalists is game cameras. Because I think it's taken for granted because Nintendo especially, they get the camera right, in their first party games. Like I never have an issue. Even from like Mario 64, like they figured so many things out that people didn't even consider about the camera, because it's less about where the player's gaze, like where you think it might be, like, and it's more about intent. It's like where are they headed? Where are they coming from? Is an enemy chasing them? Are they looking towards an objective? And it's like you got to think about all these things, but also at the same time you have to make like reasonable assumptions.
Mm-hmm.
And then on top of that, if you want to give them camera control, then, you have to build the level for that first off, because if you have like flat geometry and they can turn the camera anyway, your game's going to look really bad. But then, if you give them camera control, then you have to be able to put the camera back in a way that makes sense. Anyway, that's a lot of nonsense to say that, yeah, I completely underestimated cameras, thinking that you would just put it in the game and it would just follow the character, and everything would be fine. And that you can't be more wrong with that mindset.
Yeah, I think that point that you made about the camera, you have to make assumptions about the camera and the player's intent is so incredible. So like the hardest thing to me about cameras is that cameras have context, right?
Yeah.
If a player is running on flat ground in a field, the context of how the camera will operate is different than if the character is underwater in a cavern.
Yes.
Or if the character is jumping across platforms, or if the character is trying to hit somebody with a weapon, or if the character is actively in a fight, hand-to-hand combat, or the character needs to flee, or if the character, like there's so many contexts, and you have to have a camera that is kind of smart, right? Like
absolutely.
And it has to be able to adapt depending on, how close is the character to me? Oh, the person controlled the character and did a weird turn. And then when you give the actual player camera controls, you have to think about, so this is something I want to mention in general, is that for for every part of control that you give a player, you are now removing the ability for the player to interact with the world in a different capacity. What do I mean?
Explain that.
Okay, let's take a controller. A controller has a controller for a console, right? PlayStation 5.
Yeah.
The PlayStation 5 has a set number of buttons that exist on the controller's face, right? Every time you give the player some control of something in the world, that means, the player can make the character jump. The player can make the character squat. The player can make the character aim down sights. That is a button that is now taken, right, by a certain action. Now, if you want to give the character camera control, the player camera control, that is an interface, a button, a joystick, X, Y, and Z that is now taken. And when you don't realize that at first, like that the camera might like, hey, we're blessed now. We have like joysticks. So that's nice because the joystick kind of has different degrees and go up, down, left, right. You can click it down.
Right.
That's great. But like when you give somebody camera control on a keyboard, that's a whole nother thing.
Completely different.
Whole nother thing.
Mouse sensitivity.
Oh my goodness.
3 of the inputs, up to 3 inputs, maybe even more if they have one of those really high-tech mice. Mm-hmm. But they're going to click while moving the camera. And so you have to have a dead zone so that every time they press it, they don't just swipe and look somewhere else. You got to protect them from themselves in those ways.
Yes.
Yeah, it's too much stuff to account for.
And then there's like expectations of the players. What do they expect from a similar experience in a game that they've played before? Oh, like, okay, I'm using mouse and keyboard. Oh, when I scroll the mouse wheel, I expect the camera to do X, Y, and Z. Or like you said, if I try to whip the controller, the mouse left and right real fast, how fast does that camera move? Is it on a like 1-to-1? Is it like logarithmic? Is it like over time? Like, is it like, it's crazy.
Yeah.
How much stuff you have to consider for the camera. But we can talk about cameras for hours, clearly. But I 100% agree with that. So going back to the question that I had asked a little bit earlier, do you remember your first experience sharing a game with somebody else? Like that first.
Thanks for repeating the question because I kind of forgot.
That first time. Do you remember that first time you shared a game that you created, that you made, and you shared it with somebody to view or play for the first time? Do you kind of remember that experience?
I do. So I actually still have this game, or at least a video of it. It was made. So I'm talking. I guess I'm going to talk about my first digital game. And so Multimedia Fusion 2, and it was called Farm Return. Yeah, and I don't know where this character came from, but it's a character that's kind of like been occupying space in my brain rent free since I was about 15. And his name is Farmer Steve. No relation.
No relation. No relation.
And so it's a farmer who wears periwinkle pajamas and a straw hat and some purple slippers. Like, that's his character design. I mean, he has like a kooky mustache. But the thing is like he's always in these really perilous situations. And so the first game I made, it was a 2D side-scrolling platformer. But it was I didn't realize at the time, but it was also a Metroidvania. And I don't know where I got the inspiration for that from. But anyway, so you start off and you're Steve, and it's only one level, but the Metroidvania part comes in. You have to find keys to open doors to other pathways you get to first. It's only the keys, and that's as far as it goes. So you don't unlock new abilities and stuff. And so Farmer Steve was equipped with, he's got a double jump and he's got a kick. And so I spent months, developing this game, doing some, I did all the animations, all the artwork, all the pixel art because it was a 2D game. I did some voiceover for it. I made some music for it, like poured my heart and soul into this thing. And I knew the controls were a little rough, but I was like, they can't be that bad, right? And so I got the game to a functioning order. You could play through the game, and who did I get to test it? Either my friend, one of my best friends, Jordan, or my brother. But whoever I got to play it, the feedback was always kind of similar. Like this game is really hard. Is what they would tell me. It was a very nice way of saying this game is very bad. Because I didn't understand iframes, and there were enemies in this game. I didn't understand how to properly allocate resources, because so the enemies in the game were zombies, and the zombies had varying abilities. One was just a zombie who walked on his hands. The other one had a gun, and then the other one would just run at you. And so the one that walked on his hands was fine. He was smaller, and so he was always easy to hit. The one that would run at you was fine, but his AI was completely random. He didn't know where the player was. He would just stay in this little zone and run back and forth. But it was random in the way that it would ping pong between which direction he was running. But his speed that he would run at was random. His highest speed was faster than the player.
Oh, man.
And oftentimes he would choose to run directly at the player and not turn away or anything. And so it was like automatic damage. And the last one, which was the most egregious, was the zombie who had a gun. Now, the problem with the zombie that had a gun was he would shoot off screen. What you think would happen was that you would see the bullets, right? The bullets would come in off screen. But because I was doing so poorly allocating resources, the bullets would actually queue at the edge of the screen.
Mm.
And so when you walked into the zone to where you could see the bullets, there'd be like 30 of them.
30 of them getting ready.
Occupying one space, and you get insta-killed because you just walked into a plethora of bullets, which also moved faster than the player.
Of course.
And were about the size of a pixel.
Of course.
So that was my first experience. And then, getting that feedback, I was able to iterate a little bit. I fixed the things that I knew how to fix. But it's still nearly unplayable to this day because of those game things.
There's no salvaging.
No. But yeah, that's my first official game dev experience. What about you?
Man, so I was thinking about it, and I would make a point like, oh, it's this point, and I'm like, no, it was this point, and I kept going back and further, and now I'm not 100% sure who it was. But I do remember the experience and the feedback and how I felt. So I think I mentioned this. My first game that I ever made was called Nausea. And
Nausea.
Like I said, it was like a play off of Jonah. And I had this so one thing I'll say to every person who's ever thought to do game development, I bet you, I could pretty much guess exactly how you think about games if you've never done game development. What you do is you say to yourself, man, I have a really cool idea.
Yeah,
I have a really cool story or world, and it's normally story and world, character, something like that.
My OC.
And oh man, I really want to make this story come to life, and it would be best suited for a game. Let me tell you this right now. 99% of people who think that are absolutely wrong. The best games that have ever been created actually rarely start with the story in the game solely, but they normally start with a mechanic or something that the designer wants the character to the player to feel or accomplish. Yeah, not the story.
What are you gonna do?
The story kind of normally is created over time. A vehicle for that. So anywho, I started like every other game developer, designer who knows nothing. I had a cool story. Nausea. Jonah. I couldn't even tell you what it is at this point. I probably have written in some notebook. Anyway, I developed this thing with no feedback from anybody. Right?
Oopsie.
And I was not that I was embarrassed of this. I just had a lot of pride and was fearful of somebody playing it until I thought it was ready. Until it was gangster. Right?
Man, if that isn't a game development pitfall, I don't know what is.
And it's funny because the reason that I eventually shared it with somebody is because of GDC. And at that time, making that game, I was absolutely absorbing every piece of a GDC or game development conference content possible. Every old talk, every new talk, talks from the one in Europe, the one in Canada, the one in... it didn't matter where it was. I was absorbing it. And one thing that somebody would say is that subjectivity destroys a game. Objectivity makes it better. You need feedback. And also, you should be willing to throw away bad ideas, no matter how attached you are to them. Yeah. I did not understand this concept until somebody played my game the first time. I sit them in front of my laptop. And once again, I'm not a designer, so a lot of like my imagery for my game was really rudimentary. And as Kyle was mentioning earlier, there's like this thing that's really important to understand, that like your character in a game kind of has to make sense to the person playing it. And
has to.
There's this dissonance that happens when the character doesn't do what somebody expects when they look at it on the screen, right? So yeah, I'm making pixel art. It's terrible. Anyway, I just remember the person playing the game, and I'm like, okay, I made this level. It has platforming. They're going to do this. They got to jump on this, and they're going to jump here, and they're going to jump here, jump here. I just remember them being like moving the character around. They were able to do that. and being like stuck at the very first obstacle, not being able to jump on the first platform and being like,
oh,
hey, like, and being super confused on what they're supposed to do.
Ooh.
They were just like, what am I supposed to do? I'm like, and I'm like, I don't want to tell them what to do. I want them to experience it.
Right.
And them like pressing the keyboard and being like, okay, so jump is this. And like my timing for my jumps was super, super narrow. Like you had to perfectly press it. And the gravity was super harsh. Like it was like like 10 times stronger than normal gravity. And them not being able to make that first jump. And then like watching them for 5 minutes. And then me trying to explain to them, no. All you do is you press this and do this. And them trying that and not being able to do it. Try this and this, not being able to do it. And then them kind of like watching their spirit break in front of me. And eventually them like sitting back and leaning back in their chair and being like, this is kind of hard. Like, it seems cool, but like, wait, what? And me being like, my whole spirit breaking there. And then me having to show them how to play the game and them watching me and them going, oh, yeah, that, I don't know. Like them being super confused and like realizing, wow, I spent hours and hours and days and weeks.
Right.
And thinking I made this great experience. And within the course of 5 minutes, somebody literally making no progress and also actively telling me I don't get it. And also they're my friends, so they don't want to crush my spirit. But me knowing them thinking, this is the worst thing I've ever played in my life.
I don't know if we're going to be friends after that.
You know? It was humbling.
Yeah. It truly is. To have someone interact with something that you made, especially when you're confident in it in that way. Because I think one of the things that happens in those scenarios is that you get blinded because you're so close to the project, right?
Yes.
And so you become really good at it. It becomes second nature because you spent hours playing it. And so like you really don't have a true gauge for anything that's happening in your game after a certain point. And it's like, even to come back to a game a couple years later after working on it for those hours and hours, that stuff stays. Like, that is deeply embedded. And so it's like, you have that, but it's like, it's also the hardest thing to get that feedback because you're not going to reject yourself. And any ideas you do say, oh no, maybe it's not such a great idea, you're going to be super light on yourself. And you might even leave it in the game because, you know, it's like, oh, I thought of it and it's cool, so I just want to leave it. But yeah, to have that experience, that I wouldn't trade it though, because to not have that insight and to be like stuck in the dark of not really knowing how to make something for someone else to enjoy. Yeah, it's like game dev for not. I mean, you can make games just for yourself. Like, I'm not saying that that's a bad thing, but if you intend to make them for other people, you have to open yourself up to this type of feedback. Yeah.
I think that's one thing that by the time that me and Kyle met each other, and if you haven't listened to our origin story, which is like what, episode 3, 4, or 5 or something, I can't remember. And
it's back there.
But I think by the time me and Kyle met each other and started working together, I think we both had experienced the gut check enough where we were able to receive it and then be like, okay, that's just like subjectively objective. Like, yes, that's coming from your perspective, but that is just the truth. And I have to accept that your truth, and I'm not going to say that truth is different, but like that a person's perspective on my game does not match mine. And that I have to get over that. Like, I have to. And I think that I've seen enough creatives, even outside of game dev, who have no success in their career because they're not willing to accept that they aren't the person who's going to really evaluate the quality of their product, right?
And the value.
Value. That's I think even better way to say it. The value of your product. No matter how much time you spend in it, no matter how great it is and how masterful it was done, it doesn't matter if nobody gives any value to it, right? Like, if they think it's garbage, it doesn't matter. And I have seen it over and over and over again for people who are aspiring artists, creatives, game developers, musicians, dancers, you name it. Somebody comes to them and says, hey, just some feedback. I think X. How that person responds, I think determines their future.
It makes all the difference.
You know, like, do you go, I think for me, my first response was, oh, well, the reason I did this, and I'm trying to explain it, right? The reason I did that, the reason I did this, the reason I did that, and the person going, okay, but your game is still trash. It doesn't matter what my perspective is. It's still trash. And then me going, okay, I need to make that better. Not, well, you don't really understand my game and you don't really get what I'm going for. Like, maybe it's not for you. That is not a response you can have if you ever want to make something great. Like, you have to be willing, you know?
Yeah, because I think there's also a difference between receiving the feedback and actually evaluating it versus just accepting all feedback. Because sometimes it will be personal feedback from somebody, and it doesn't necessarily mean that your game is bad.
Yeah.
But the point is that you need to receive all of it to some degree. Like, don't just shut it down, because there's a good chance that a lot of it is going to be valid, and players are going to share that same perspective. And so if you can just be, just being willing to hear it out, you know. Yeah.
Yeah. So I want to share, and I assume you've had a similar experience. So when you start sharing your games with people, they give you feedback, right? And personally, for most of my experience making games, most of it was negative feedback with a little bit of like, oh, like, I see where you're going, or, oh, that was a cool idea, or like, as I kept on iterating forward. And I think the moment I realized that I love creating things and that this resonates with me was the first time somebody played something I made and they were enjoying it, and I could just watch them enjoy it. I'll be honest, that is the high. That is the drug that keeps me at this. Like, like for me, one is creative expression. Like, to me, definitely, I love making it and I love doing it, and I do it because I want to. But when you get that first time, and I think for me, it was my second game, Chef of Fire, where I made it and I'd gotten feedback, and I finally let somebody play it, and they went into that zone where I wasn't there anymore, and they were just playing the game, and I just watched them. I watched them do things that I wouldn't do. I watched them solve problems in ways that I never thought were possible. I watched them run into an obstacle, stop and think about it, try it again, stop and think about it, try it differently, make some improvements, and get past it, and then go, ugh! Like, get that little, like, I did it!
Yeah.
Right?
Can we talk about that for a second?
Yeah, absolutely.
That moment of, people that play your game are not going to play it like you expect them to.
Oh, yeah.
Like, it's an unwritten rule of game dev. It's the whole reason why, like, people can make whole YouTube careers finding bugs and glitches and breaking boundaries, is because as a game dev, you can do everything in your power to try and institute laws within your game and convince people to play the game how you intended. And they may even have the right motive at heart, where they want to play the game as you intended, but because they're a different person than you, they're going to have different ways of going about it. Like, they're just going to be inclined. So like you were saying, just fundamentally, they're going to approach this completely different. Like, you put two boxes next to each other and you say, hey, stand on this box, and you give the character ability to jump. Somebody's going to jump on one box and then jump from that one to the other. And somebody else is going to figure out how to glitch on the wall and then jump from the wall to the box. Like, it's somebody's gonna clip through the wall and ignore the boxes entirely, and somehow find a plane to where they can get to the last level and make a speed run of your game. Like it's gonna happen.
Yes.
And so like those are the valuable lessons and feedback that because when you're making the game, I think arguably you can get pigeonholed and like tunnel vision, and you only play the game as you intended to be played. And so like you're measuring how well the game is against that. So getting that feedback against people who aren't going to play the game as it's intended to be played on purpose or not is something you just can't get anywhere else.
Yes. I think, I'm just going to go ahead and skip to the story, because I think this is something for me and Kyle that's very personal. And I think a game development experience that I think has changed a lot of how we make games, how we approach games, the tools we use, our approaches, is our first, I would say, collaborative release, and first release that kind of had every element we might have wanted in a game and that we felt really good about, which is Amber. Now, Amber, first of all, it's hard to explain to somebody the way that Amber was created and how it started and where it is now. And, God willing, one day we'll be able to work on Amber again. We'll see what his path is for us. But, Amber was just literally kind of this outpouring of creative.
It's the definition of a passion project.
Yes. All right, I'm gonna try my best not to this story could go super long, so I'm gonna try my best. So, once again, origin of me and Kyle becoming friends and working together. So we worked at IBM together, and I was aware of Kyle because of another friend that we mutually have. Shout out to Adam. So I remember seeing Kyle start working at our building, at IBM. I was like, oh, this is black dude with a fro. I was like, and also I'm like, let me not talk to every black person that I see. If
that ain't real.
If we cross paths, it is what it is. But anyway, because of Adam, I found out that Kyle was into game dev. But me and Kyle had never really interacted, really. Even though we were a few desks away from each other, rows of desks. We just never interacted. No, nothing behind it. We just never did. Because Adam, we started talking, getting to know each other, talking about game dev stuff together. And I don't know, me and Kyle had some kind of conversation, and I told him about a particular set of videos that really had inspired me in game dev. And it, for those who are not familiar, Game Informer, they had this series called Replay. And basically all they did is they replayed old games. And the big spin on it was that they had every game that was ever released in what they called their vault.
It was wild.
And they would just grab games. And there's this one game called Tale of the Sun. And they were so enamored by this game, they made this thing called Super Replay, where they not just played the game for a little bit, remember this game? They played through the whole entirety of the game.
All of it.
And for anybody who's never seen Tale of the Sun, I really encourage you to look up the Game Informer Super Replay of Tale of the Sun. Tale of the Sun. There is no game that exists that's like Tale of the Sun.
Wasn't that game from a cereal box? You get a disc in
I think it was an actual game, but it was sponsored or inspired by a cookie company.
Oh.
It's really weird.
Inspired by... That would be better.
Long story short, I shared this set of videos with Kyle because I'd seen him before when I was in college. I was like, yo, I think you'd get something out of this. And I rewatched it. He watched it. And we just were inspired by something in there. I don't know. Do you remember? It had to be the open world quirkiness and the...
I do. Yeah. I don't know exactly what it was. I think it was just how that game was just so unpredictable.
Yes.
And whenever it felt like the people who were playing it had a foothold and they were starting to understand what was happening, something else completely out of the blue would happen, but it would sort of like explain something else, and it would also make progress.
Mm-hmm.
And it was because one of the biggest things that we pulled from it that we put in Amber was that we didn't tell the player anything in the first version of Amber, and Tale of the Sun did it so well.
Yes. Yeah. I think the word that we came down to was discovery.
Discovery.
Because it was like this weird thing where you really felt like you were discovering the world in Tale of the Sun. Like they'd go north or south or whatever, and it was like a whole nother world to them. Like they had landmarks. Oh, the Panther Pit, Ganon, the Mammoth. Like it was so much like North Town or something. Like they had all these things. And they'd explore, and then the game had like death in it, so you die and then have to restart and then have to re-explore, and like you'd also get lost, and they're mapping the world. Anyway,
the stamina mechanic.
Yo, I gotta go back and rewatch it, son. It was such an experience. It's been long enough where I really have forgotten a lot of it, but it inspired Amber, and we didn't have a plan. We were just like, yo, let's just make something. I can't even remember how we came into this concept, you know? And it just so happened, you know, Marcus asked about tools. So one of the tools that me and Kyle have used a lot is Unity. And
Unity game engine.
Unity is definitely one of the most popular, most well-known, most dabbled with game engine.
Very user-friendly.
Very user-friendly, easy, accessible, free. And we both used Unity separately. But one thing that had happened at the same time was that Unity started this thing called collab. And it's all timing. Like, so collab
it really was.
Essentially was this ability for you to collaborate with somebody else, you know, over the internet. So if Kyle made a change, I would see that change on my side. For those who work in game development, it was basically a repo with, you know, a history, right? And but it also managed your digital assets, you know, your visuals, your code, your everything within Unity.
Everything.
And it was user friendly, like so user friendly that Kyle, who is not a developer, could easily use it. And well, not easily. There's a lot of stuff we learned, but relatively,
it was still new.
Use it. So what happened is, like, I never used collab. He never used collab, but I had just discovered it. I was like, yo, let's use collab and like start working on a joint project inspired by Tale of the Sun. And I don't, you know, Kyle, definitely, I feel like we've talked about this before, but definitely one of my favorite game dev experiences of all time, because me and Kyle have a similar energy when it comes to creativity, but we're also like very different. So what would happen is, I don't know who started it. Maybe it was me, maybe it was you. But we had this kind of open world concept. We had come up with this idea. Oh, you know, we're going to have these boulders and you're going to break them. And it's like making an impasse. And your whole goal is to get to this town and blah, blah, blah. Like our first starting. And like what would happen is me and Kyle would work separately from each other. Like maybe one evening I'd work, another evening he'd work. And what we would do is just submit our code and publish it. And then we'd like, at first it started off where we'd just be like, hey, I added boulders to this area. Hey, I added a pig, blah, blah, blah. And then it became a thing where one of us would go, something new was added. Maybe you'll figure it out or something.
So obscure. Yeah. So if we ever needed to go back in history, we were setting ourselves up so badly. But what it was like messages to each other. And then we'd load in. Maybe I'd load in and I'd notice there was a new boulder in the world. Like, we would always position it in a way that you could not see it, you know? Yeah. Once you hit play, it was
it was there. So I'd see like, oh, Kyle added a new boulder. But like, it was always like a surprise. Like, you know, like it'd be a setup. Like, I remember at one point, we created this ability to open chests, right? And so I had made the script where essentially you could put pretty much anything in the chest.
Anything.
Right?
Yeah.
And so what we would do is like, we started putting in puzzles and like stuff like that. And we might put random stuff in the chest. And I remember one time, like, I can't remember who started this, but it was like, we made a puzzle and the person made the puzzle and the chest was there. And then you have to open the chest but the chest spawned like the most evil enemy in the game.
Murder so Bear. We created the Murder Bear. What were the origins of Murder Bear? I don't even remember.
So this is very personal to me. So y'all are truly listening to me and Kyle have a conversation. Like we're going off the rails. So we'll bring it back. So Murder Bear. Murder Bear comes from a concept I had a long time ago, where I was like, wouldn't it would be super cool in a game to have an entity that was just pure like chaotic neutral
and rage.
Yes, and like super powerful, but you never know where they're gonna be, and they don't have like a goal that's very obvious to you, and they would just like roam the map, and you may encounter them at any point in the game. So it's like my mind was like, what if there's like this creature that roamed around the map, wasn't aware of your presence until you interacted with it, and then it would just murder you that first time, and you'd be like, what in the world? Like, but it was like you wouldn't necessarily know where it was. And Murder Bear was that. Murder Bear was just basically an overpowered enemy who just roamed the world with his own volition, but when you encountered it, would murder you. Like, just point blank.
Because Murder Bear started off sort of when he was first brought into the game as a normal bear, but then eventually we made the decision to make him walk upright.
Yes.
And so it's a bear running at you with his arms stretched out on two legs.
Full sprint.
And he's significantly faster than you. Screaming.
It just you don't know what's happening. He just comes off screen, boom, and you're dead. And the whole goal was that he was kind of like everybody's experience with Murder Bear would be completely different. Like the first time they interact, and eventually you'd be able to kill Murder Bear, and there'd be something. And then eventually, man, we're getting deep into Murder Bear because eventually we created a lair for Murder Bear, and if you interacted with Murder Bear's lair, wherever he was on the map, he would get alerted and run to you and murder you. So he could be like right around the corner, so he'd get there fast. Sometimes it would take like 5 solid minutes because he's so far away.
On the other side of the map, figuring out pathing.
But he's full sprinting to you to come murder you.
I think at one point we actually did have, whenever you found his lair, because we set it up, it was kind of clever because it was on a part of the map where you had to make your way through this forest where there were dangers, and there's a Murder Bear statue inexplicably, and then the way to get into his lair, unless you glitched it, you had to be at a certain level to break down the boulder
in front of his house. Yes.
Yeah. And so then when you walked in, I'm pretty sure we had a message that said like, something's not right, or I feel a disturbance.
Yes.
Or something like that.
I feel a chill on my spine or something like that. It was but it's like, okay.
Because what we did was, so Murder Bear's lair was this long hallway, and at the end of it was like 8 chests. So you earned it to go in there, and you wouldn't get the message until you were at the chests opening them. And then the way we had the camera positioned was, so you walk into the hallway, and so you can't see the entrance anymore. And so that's where Murder Bear would come in.
Yes.
And just, it was dark in there.
It was...
we were kind of evil.
We were evil, but the whole development of this game was this pure creative energy. Oh, I came up with a new idea. Check it out. Came up with a new idea. And then like maybe I'd iterate on it, and then Kyle would iterate on it, and then we'd make it a thing. And it was always these pieces and puzzles, and essentially, like, to be very honest, there are like secrets in the game that I think we both are unaware of. Meaning I put something in that Kyle doesn't know I put in, and Kyle put something in that I don't know he put in. So, and it's just in the world, you know? And I think if we play it now, we wouldn't even be aware of our own things that we've done. So, like, we'd have to go into development mode and look through all the assets to maybe figure out what we were doing. So, so we went through this, inspired by all this stuff we're creating, and we're just building this world. But eventually in the process, I kind of like, hey, Kyle, we should actually release this. Like, we should actually publish this. Because we were like, so Steve, this is kind of where Steve enters the story. And going back to how we were talking about getting feedback, I remember we made the game and we had this whole mentality. We're going to tell the player nothing. There's going to be no HUD, no UI on the screen when you're playing. It's just going to be you and the player and their pickaxe, which is their main way to operate in the world. And the person's going to have to figure it out all on their own. We let Steve play. Do you remember Steve's feedback?
Not exactly. No. What did he say?
Steve was like, this game plays horribly or something. Like, it controls horribly. What's happening? Why am I doing it? Like, Steve was just going in. Like,
he was real.
He was
I
like,
do remember that.
He's like, the controls don't make it. How do I do a thing? How do I know what my health is? What's happening? Why is this person attacking me? He was just like breaking down everything. And one thing I've always appreciated about Steve, he's a straight shooter, right?
He is.
So we're just watching him play, but he's just breaking this all down. And and this is one of those moments where we have to make a decision. Are we going to stick with our original vision of making a game that gives you no feedback? Or realize that the best experience for a player is for them to have an idea of what's going on, but to keep it as minimal as possible, but still give them information that helps them, you know?
Yeah, because our intent, I think it was more inspired by not spoon feeding information by having a bunch of like text boxes and UI all over the place, because that's what Tale of the Sun did. But then, yeah, what Steve made us aware of is that things just in that effort, we didn't make things clear.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, because we were building it, you know, we knew where it started, what the intent was, how to solve it. And so we didn't need clarity. We would just go do it. But for somebody who's picked up the controller for the first time, has to figure out the character controller, why the camera doesn't move, how the game operates, what their motivation should be. They have questions beyond even what, like, mechanics. It's just like, why is anything?
Yeah. It's just complete, like, it's hard from a game developer standpoint to understand that, like, you take for granted some of the knowledge that you have, right? Like,
oh, for sure.
You come into the game, you're making these things, so they're all obvious to you. But somebody who's never played, and I was so happy with that because it really inspired us and to have some creative solutions that still like made the game still a minimal level of HUD,
mm-hmm.
but with some like immersive UI. So like Kyle came up with this whole idea of like, oh, like you can have people's health like in the game, not on the UI, but like in the world itself. Right.
Yeah.
And then like eventually Kyle started adding in these ideas for having like equipment. And because he started adding in that, he started adding these visual indicators that were actually in game. Like, oh, this thing is like your health, like there's just a lot of immersive UI, immersive visual feedback that I think has kind of inspired us further in our game development, you know? And I feel like without that feedback, we would have never thought to go that way, you know?
For sure.
And
yeah, because it caused us to innovate because, like you were saying, we were kind of stubborn in a way that we weren't willing to completely course correct and reverse it and say, okay, we're going to put a HUD. We're going to have a menu that has all the controls in it. You know, we didn't course correct that hard, and so the only thing to do in between was to make new and creative solutions
mm-hmm.
that fulfilled what the player needs, but also didn't go against what our initial goals were. And so, yeah, that's where the immersive UI elements came from. Yeah, like icons only being present when they were contextual.
Mm-hmm.
And then whenever you pick something up, it having particle effects that showed you what it was attributed to. Or we even put in some cutscenes. You know, when you pick certain things up. Like, yeah, so when you leveled up the axe, you created that cutscene where the axe would come to the screen and show you that you leveled it up. When you pick up an item that affects something else across the map, the camera would pan over. So you'd be like, okay, that's where I need to go next. Still with no words, you know, no voices, all still just sounds and visuals.
Yeah.
Which is what we were going for.
And I think, you know, it really came together in a way that we never thought. And, you know, this is probably the first time we had immersive menus. Like very creative ways to display how you're leveling and how things were working. We also experimented with multiple controller support, right? Like,
oh man,
that whole effort. The first time we made a UI that could be used with a controller, a keyboard, a mouse, like it's crazy how many elements. But the big thing that came out of that whole experience, and why I still see it as one of my favorite game dev experience, was the actual push to publish. Mm-hmm. So I think if you're a person who's never made a game before, we've already talked about some of the things that, you know, we underestimated, like, like the UI, or, you know, making characters, or what was the other thing we said?
The cameras.
But the thing that you really underestimate is, what does it take to get this game out there, finished, and like wrapped up and cleanly done.
Yeah, published
in a way that you don't have to even, like, one thing that I used to do in the past, I'd make a game and then it would be finished, but what I would have to do is a lot of like explanation on the front end before somebody plays it. Oh, like, be aware that this is like this how it is, and you got to do this and this and this and that, right? If I just put it out there in the wild, somebody might not be able to play it at all, you know? I did publish a few games before on the Android App Store, but the Android, it was always very limited experiences with very few mechanics. And I also would have to have, you know, I'd have to do tutorials and stuff like that. But this was a completely different experience because it was like an end to end from menu to credits, you know, like,
yeah.
And then we're going to put it on a platform where we would probably have no direct interaction with people who played it.
Unless they reached out to us.
Yeah. So do you remember how that felt, like that last like 3 weeks?
Yeah. So because, and I said this before, but I'll say it again, that I appreciate your push to, like, for us to be intentional, setting a deadline and having a goal to reach when it came to publishing the game. Because as before, because I'd made a couple games, I was completely content with seeing how far the game went, and, you know, that being it. We make personal builds on our computers, maybe share it with a couple friends, you know, the same typical thing you do whenever you quote unquote finish a game. And so I appreciate you pushing us to go that extra mile and actually publish it to a platform, because yeah, it did bring up, like, we found the most things wrong with our game, I think, in those final 3 weeks, because we were doing like testing, and we had to play through the game through its entirety a dozen times. Man. And sometimes we used, you know, dev tools, most of the time not, especially when we did like local builds. There were no dev tools for us to use. We had to play through the game vanilla, and then this is also, or you'd already implemented, but we were strategically, I guess, if you will, testing. So the ending UI that shows you all your metrics, and then the saving and loading, and all those different things that, again, we take for granted about games. You know, a game should save your progress. Everybody knows this, but that's not free. So, like, you got to put that in there on purpose. Like games back in the day had codes to get to a certain stage, because that junk is taxing to put into a game. And then if you add on the modern features like custom character builds, you know, where they're wearing every single piece of armor somebody's wearing has to be accounted for in that save data. And the moment it's not, everybody has a cow. This should be easy. But it's like just saving what stage somebody is on takes effort.
True story.
So anyway, that's a bit of a rant. But the last 3 weeks showed us, it shined a light on all these things, because we were at the point to where legitimately we were thinking, this is going out for someone else to play. Like, if they come to us to play it, we still have some control over the experience, because, you know, we're standing next to them, or we email to them, so they're going to email us back because we know them personally. But like you said, there's a good chance once we put it out there, we're not going to know who's going to download the game, who's going to try to play it. And so it's like trying to really think about those things was something that we wouldn't have been intense about if we weren't trying to publish it.
Yeah, it just gave me so much respect for like AAA games or games that are 40-hour experiences with like our game. If I would say an average playthrough might take, what would you say, like 45 minutes to an hour, 2 hours?
I don't remember. I remember seeing, though, that people we didn't know that were playing the game were playing for, half a dozen hours to 10 hours.
Like, if you knew everything, you could probably get it done in an hour, 45 minutes an hour, if you knew what you were doing.
Yeah.
But
you could get to the win condition because we set it up to where you didn't have to finish very much of the game to be able to get to the end credits. Mm-hmm. So you'd have to know what the end credits trigger is. And then, so if you did a streamlined approach, I would say 45 minutes to an hour is reasonable.
Yeah, because one of our main things that we wanted to do with the game as well, one of our like guiding principles, is that you could play the game the way that you wanted to play it. Like, we gave you your main objective, kind of, sort of. We kept it like generally vague. But there was this one mechanic. But you could do anything. You could go here, you could fight bosses, you could level up your stuff, you could get new equipment. But honestly, there's only one mechanic that mattered. Your pickaxe hitting rocks, and that would go up as long as you broke rocks. And eventually you get your pickaxe high enough level where you'd be able to go up this staircase, which would take you to the end sequence, right? And if you beat that end sequence, you get the credits and, boom. But it was, a few hours experience. Now, thinking about a game like Grand Theft Auto or Assassin's Creed or Breath of the Wild, I was just thinking, like, the amount of effort we put in to button up those last pieces.
Yeah.
To fix every weird little edge case or, how many playthroughs I did personally, I don't know. So us combined, who knows how many hours we've personally played the game. But like you said, some things you can't be sure works unless you went through the whole experience and got to the end. And then the worst feeling is you get to that end sequence and something breaks. And you had to spend an hour plus to do all the stuff just to find one minuscule issue that you might not even be able to solve easily. Where now you have to go into the code, try to mimic that scenario so you can figure out what went wrong.
Right.
And just boom. And we had a deadline. We had a date. We knew when we were going to do it. And just, and this is where the game development is no longer, and we already said game development isn't fun, but like, if you want game development to break you, it's in this moment where you're putting the finishing touches, making sure the save works right, making sure that the leveling up, the menu, the credits, adding in the credits correctly, making sure it takes you back to the beginning screen at the end of the credits. Like these little pieces you don't think about. It will break you.
It will. It will drag you through the mud. You'll be questioning everything. Like, is this really what I want to do? Like, does it really matter? Because it's not like somebody else was putting this pressure on us. It was self-imposed. And so I feel like that's a lot of the reason why we can kind of brush off, I guess, the more difficult parts of game dev, at least in my opinion, or in my experience, is because if it's just me telling me to do it and it makes me uncomfortable, but it's like when you do it, you're 1,000% better for it, just for experiencing it.
Mm-hmm. And you walk away with this understanding from the very beginning. Like, I feel like when we do games now, like we haven't made a game in a while, but like, say we did a game jam, we already have in mind the things that we need to have to, like, the base level things that need to be done in order for this to be a complete experience.
Yeah.
Like, oh, you need a menu. You need to be able to save. You need to be able to quit. You need to be able to have, a pause. You need to be able to, like, there's things you just don't think through until you go through it one time,
You got to be there.
And
yeah,
it was a tough experience. But the reason I bring up this whole experience is because the ending, when we finally were like, we're good. This is it. We're hitting publish. And the number one, it was cathartic to get it done. To be like, we're done. Knowing we probably have to go back and make some minor fixes here or there if somebody found something.
Yeah, we had a couple of updates.
But like, it was done. And Kyle wasn't there for it live, but I was able to share the video with him. Is when we had somebody we knew, one of our good friends, shout out to Smiles, play the game. Like, he had no understanding of what we were doing. He had no idea what was going on. I just said, hey, you want to come over and just play my game? I think Steve was there watching, maybe another friend. And I just video recorded him playing it. And to see somebody fully immersed in our world. Like,
I know.
Like, it almost makes me emotional to think about, like,
still giving me chills right now, man.
All the work we went through and seeing somebody play it in that little, like, wow moment. That little, yo, or they figure out a puzzle, or they discover something, or they do something I was not expecting. Like I was saying before.
Every time.
Like they do, like, yo, I would have never thought to solve that puzzle that way. I would have never thought to approach the problem that way. And to see, like, the intent, like, them wanting to keep playing, and like, the best part of it all, and the thing that neither of us probably thought about, was that we made a game that was an experience for the person playing and the person watching. Like,
yeah, it's a pretty good game to spectate.
Yeah. Like, we never thought about it. But, like, a lot of what it is mystery and discovery and these puzzles that we give you little hints, but you don't really know. But when you have somebody sitting in a room with you, like, hey, try this.
Right.
Hey, go here. Hey, and like them working together, like, I honestly, man, like, I was like, this is it. Like, this is what I want to do,
Because that's the experience you can only kind of facilitate by giving someone, a sandbox, but then having that feedback along the way that says, this isn't intuitive. This could be a little bit more clear. Because in Smiles' experience, he wasn't trying to worry about the mechanics. Like, it got to the point to where he was just able to, like you said, get immersed in the game. And it's like something like that, it makes it all worth it at the end. Because I have a couple of videos too of people playing it, and it's like one of the biggest things you'll hear whenever you create something is the term "you made this," and there's two inflections. It's like, oh, you made this, or you made this,
yeah,
And it's like we were getting that second one more often than the first one, thankfully.
Yes,
because I did see some people play it, and they hadn't played a game much before, especially a 3D game, so they were kind of bewildered, and so they kept dying to, like, falling in the water and stuff. So you see that, but then other people who have played 3D games before saying, "Oh, this feels good enough, to be." It's our first release, so you got to set the bar at a reasonable place. And for them to say, "Oh, this is good enough," to where they feel like they're getting better at the game, like things are becoming more intuitive, they're progressing at a rate that makes sense, Like, to have somebody get better, to experience somebody getting better at your game is like a really cool feeling.
Yes, that means that you put in the things, the pieces that makes it a game where, like, you can actually get better. It's like, it's not just that, oh, the game is impeding me from progress. There's the player who's gaining skills and becoming better at jumping, better at attacking, better at movement, better at considering problems. You know what I'm saying? Like, we create, and I agree with you, man. That wait, you made this? Like, that right there is it. You have to understand. Like, it talks about in the Bible. I'm gonna get real spiritual for a second.
Break it down.
It talks about how Jesus goes to his hometown to perform miracles. Right. Number one, we're not comparing ourselves to Jesus, so just check that. Like, just know that for sure. But one thing is, like, Jesus is, if you believe in Jesus or not, just as far as what he's representing in the Bible, He's a miracle worker. He's healing people. He's preaching the good word of God, and people are amazed all around, right? He comes home. He's been doing this for a while. And it says Jesus didn't perform many miracles in his hometown because people didn't believe in him, right? And I always was thinking to myself, why is this? And it's because they knew Jesus, right? Like
he was familiar.
They're familiar. Like, oh, you talk about Jesus who tripped and fell down the steps that time? Man, that boy ain't doing no miracles. Right. You know what I'm saying?
Saw him grow up, man.
So to see, and once again, we're not comparing ourselves to Jesus, but to feel like people who know you don't have skills. You know what I'm saying? Who've seen you when you were making nausea or our first trash games, to play our game and to go like, yo, like to be having fun, to actually not think we made it, or to just be like, wow, this was fun. This was solid. Like, right. That's it, man. Like to me, it's like if one person enjoys it, it's worth it.
Yeah.
It's worth it.
And that's another thing about, and it's kind of a lesson that I've been learning more and more as I've been gaining less time as an adult, is the idea of playing a game and getting value out of it versus playing a game and then the value being linked to you finishing it. Mm-hmm. And this is something that was kind of bothering me when we made our game, is like we were looking at the metrics and people were only playing for so long. They were doing certain things and they weren't finishing the game.
Yeah.
But then like looking from this perspective is like, well, this person played for 12 hours and they broke like thousands or every single rock that was on the map. It's like they had a good time, mm-hmm. Like maybe it was just a cathartic experience for them to go through and experience the game this way. And I feel like I experience even AAA titles that way these days. Some games, a lot of games I feel like are made to be played infinitely these days. But, there are games that do have more linear and storylines and, are intended to be finished. And so to build an experience also with the idea that somebody's going to get out of it or can get out of it enough to, even if they have a good time for 15 minutes, like they enjoy the game and they put it down, not because they don't like it, but just because they feel like they've gotten the value out of it. Mm-hmm. Looking back, I feel like most of the people that I at least witnessed play did get that. And maybe part of it was because, somebody I know made this, so they felt close to it. And, I choose to believe that some of it was also because they genuinely did enjoy the game. But both of those things still matter because, like we said earlier, just because we made it doesn't necessarily mean they'll have a good time.
True. Very true. Yeah, I think most people who play games that know me or play anything I've made are a little bit more critical. Like,
oh, for sure. Yeah.
And they want to tell me everything. Oh, like, this is weird. Like, why is this over here? Da, da, da. So, like, I expect that. But, like, yeah, like, it was funny because, so one thing about Amber itself is there was a lot of innovations from our standpoint, from a game development standpoint. That was the first time we had done save systems, like a real solid save system in Unity. The first time we had really done AI in a meaningful way. We were using a lot of like tricks with the culling and different things.
Day-night
cycles, like specific AI for particular enemies and particular types. We had these class, like it was like so many things we did. But one of the cool things we did at some point, I think I was inspired by some of the work I had been doing in general, was like metrics. Like one thing you hear about from game developers and game developer conferences and different things is metrics. Tracking how people are playing your game to give you some insight on what you can improve on and how you can make the game better. So one thing we did was analytics. What we did is we added this ability to track how players played. We don't know anything about the players other than what they give us, like their nickname or name they enter. Sometimes people put their name, some people put a nickname. It doesn't really matter. But we could see how people played the game. We could see how they died, how often they died, at what time point they died, what they died by, how many times they picked up a certain thing, how many certain rocks they broke, how far they traveled. We had all these metrics. And it was so interesting looking at people's metrics. I wonder if that data still exists. Is the game still running? I think technically you could still play it. Anyway, we should talk about that offline. But it was interesting. Like, I would look through the metrics and I could literally see somebody would play the game for like 3 hours and make like no progress. But I could see that they died like 100 times. Like, they were just running
big.
Like they were just running around the world, absolutely not playing the game correctly, but they were getting value from it.
Yeah.
And to me, I'm like, what? Like,
right.
Why? You know, some people would play for 5 minutes, be like, die in the water, and be like, done. That was definitely the main cause of death, drowning.
This game trash.
You know, so it just blew my mind, you know, looking at that experience that people were having. It was just numbers, but like, you could see that people were actually playing our game and getting something from it, you know?
And speaking to the water, I remember that was the decision we were talking about because, man, for the longest time in games, you could think of how many games allowed you to swim.
Mm-hmm.
And that is by design because along with cameras and along with, what was the other thing? It was along with those things that we underestimate, water physics and swimming.
Absolutely.
And transitioning states between swimming and walking. And so so one of the things is we made water like a tremendous hazard in our game by design, so nobody would ever question it.
Like, don't go in water; you will drown, and you will not be able to get out. You know, and also we were using that as a means to keep the person on the island, because you know, and then there are some secrets out in the water for anybody who's played it. You know, like there's a lot of reasons, but yeah, like water is, you know, Amber is kind of like the culmination of a lot of what we've done. But even past that, you know, we've done game jams. We've done a lot of things. But, you know, I know Marcus asked about tools. And one thing that I would say is that I think why I like Unity. So Unity, I used Unity way back in the day. In like 2011, 12.
Oh, nice.
I was using Unity. I had no clue. I made this garbage game where it was about, you had it was this whole like librarian game where like you had to move the right books to open up a passageway. It was terrible.
You made a game about being a librarian?
Not exactly. You know how, going back to the whole concept of you make a story and you make this idea and then you try to make it to a game. I had this whole idea. I can't even remember. I probably haven't written down. So it was so bad. But but it's like, I am thankful for tools like Unity.
Oh, for sure.
Because I think one of the reasons way back in the day I felt that game development was inaccessible was because I was plugged enough into the gaming industry, not game development, but the gaming industry, to understand what it took to be a studio, right? First, you have to purchase the game dev kit, which was thousands of dollars.
Thousands.
Like, I want to make a PlayStation 2 game. Well, you had to buy the kit. And then
specific development kit.
You have to reach out to Sony, and then Sony would have to approve you and then send it. And then it's not like they sent you a manual with how to make the game. You had to have your own computers and write in some obscure language and, you know, build the engines yourself. And so I'd heard about these stories. Like, how many Game Informers have I read where they made their own engine that does light reflection and mirrors and water and physics? And I was like, who am I? I'm terrible at math. You know, at least realizing later that math wasn't the most important factor, but it just seemed impossible. Unity was the first time that it felt possible to like make a real game, you know?
Right.
And, you know, I don't really know, like, the whole game development landscape looks completely different because of Unity, but not just because of Unity, but because of stuff like, what was the thing that you used back in the day?
Multimedia Fusion.
Multimedia Fusion. For me, it was ActionScript and Flash. It was also RPG
Game Maker, I think was RPG Maker.
RPG Maker ran into Construct, which I figured out how to make Construct into something it should have never been. For those who don't understand, Construct at the time couldn't do API calls correctly. HTTP requests. I figured out how to get it to do HTTP requests in a way that it should have never been able to do. But anyway, like Construct. What other game engines are there that exist?
So outside of those, current ones,
that people can develop in.
So we got Godot.
Yes.
Unreal has a free version.
Unreal.
Yeah, and there are more for sure.
Those are definitely.
I'm drawing a blank.
Those are definitely the major players, and I think Unity has definitely become the home for us because that's kind of where 3D game development was the most comfortable. And then me and Cal have both talked about this. We've both wanted to get into Unreal. We've both dabbled in Unreal. But the learning curve on Unreal is unreal. Like, it's definitely better now. But, like, even me being a person who did work in C++ and Unreal using C++, it was still like, man.
It's a different animal. Especially if you're used to Unity, because it's a transition. Yeah, it's a completely different software. And then a completely different language. And then on top of that, Unreal, I think in an effort to make it more accessible, they have the blueprints, and so you have to learn how those work within these systems. So yeah, it's a lot. It seems daunting.
Yeah. And then and that's one thing that's really important about the tools is the accessibility to not only using them, but like what exists out there to guide you and how many people are using it. So, for example,
that's a great point.
Like Unity, when I started it, there wasn't much information out there, but it was like pretty low level. You just messed around and you figure stuff out. But over time, you like see more blogs and more people writing about it. And of course, YouTube videos started coming around. So now there's just a plethora of information on like
it's everywhere.
Basic Unity game development. There's some tools that aren't very heavily, looked into, but most. Now, Unreal, I don't know if you remember this, Kyle, but do you remember when, first of all, shout out to the boy Terry. If you remember Terry from
I do remember Terry.
Probably
Terry was GOAT.
He's truly like the GOAT. Like one of the most intelligent, hardworking, solid dudes I've ever met. Like
another level.
Like honestly, and I think I've told him this, but like I think he could be Elon Musk if he wanted to be.
If he wanted to.
Like if he wanted to, but he's chill, so I appreciate Terry for that. But there was a time where working at IBM, found out that IBM worked on Star Trek Bridge Crew.
Oh yeah,
which was the VR game that used what was it? Watson
yeah.
AI, which was like a language speech to text translator, text to speech,
all that stuff,
image, all that jazz. And it used speech to text for you to play the game. So, I had found out about it at E3, but I knew I was already messing with Watson and doing some game development stuff at IBM. And so I was like aware of it. And what happened was I managed to meet somebody who was working with the Star Trek Bridge Crew team, and they needed help on creating I guess you could say I don't want to say framework, but they basically wanted the ability to use Watson in Unreal Engine. Now, I had dabbled in Unreal Engine, but I was also doing other things, and I didn't have the time to sit down and figure it out. I had used Watson pretty heavily, and I knew the API pretty well, or the API being the mechanism that you use to interact with Watson over the cloud, over the internet. And I was just talking to Terry, and I was like, hey, I know you're looking for more challenging things to do. This came across my table. I don't have time to do it. I can help you, like, be the middleman if you want to work on it. And Terry, in his incredible ability, basically managed to make an interface that allowed you to use Watson. This had never been done before. Like, you have to understand.
He figured it out.
This is a game that was being published by a game development company. And Terry, primarily, me as just support and helping with anything I could, didn't really get into the code. Terry managed to make a mechanism to allow Watson to be used within Unreal Engine to bridge it in the C++ from what it was being used. Because you could use it in Unity I had figured out already how to do that. That's why they had reached out to me, because I'd already created like a scaffolding to use it in Unity, but it was a lot easier. So anyway, like the Unreal is just like so much more complex, and like Unity just being a lot more like accessible and easier. Like, just for like, first of all, for Terry to do something like that was absolutely incredible. Because I think the fact that they reached out to us to do it means that they couldn't figure it out. But like, that just shows you the difference in the gap between like skill level, like in Unreal and Unity, you know?
Yeah.
Not to downplay myself, but to say like, I don't know, somebody who I think is honestly one of the smartest people I've ever met, like, that's what they needed to like use Unreal in a way, you know?
Yeah, and I think it's a double-edged sword too, because Unity, in its infinite accessibility, has also allowed for this generation of, I guess, what could be considered shovelware.
Yes.
You know, like, there are objectively too many games being made, and it's like, as a result, or it's because of Unity being so easy.
Yeah.
Is that people who don't make games for the right intentions are leveraging how easy it is, you know?
Yeah.
And, you know, it maybe people disagree. The right intentions, maybe making games just for money, some people will agree is fine. But I think holistically, if you're a gamer, making games specifically for the intent to scam people, or not scam them, but just make a game where somebody will just play it for 5 minutes so they can get just obliterated with ads or some equivalent, or you make them feel FOMO and want to buy skins. Whatever malicious thing you're using it for is bad. I think most people would agree. And Unity, it's unfortunately, I don't think it was the intent, but they've unfortunately created a very easy way.
Yeah. Like,
the barrier to entry is super low.
It's very low. And in many ways, I'm thankful to Unity, as I mentioned before, for lowering that barrier of entry so that we could enter the field.
Yeah.
But I think there's a point where you have to make it a little bit inaccessible to make sure that the quality stays a little bit higher, right?
Exactly.
It's it's kind of
got to be regulated in some way.
Yeah, you just need some like at my Muay Thai gym, like they don't let everybody go to certain classes. Like there's like, yeah, everybody's been here for a while, but they basically want to make sure that the right people are more or less doing it so that they keep the general level okay, you know, and also that people don't get hurt. And I think that that's kind of how I feel Unity has failed a little bit, in that they have tried to be too accessible, like you're saying, Kyle. Like,
it's damaging the health of the industry.
Mm-hmm.
Because it being open to absolutely anyone on paper sounds like a good idea. But yeah, going back to your example, you know, intentions are a big part of it. You know, it's just I mean, it's the unfortunate thing that has to be done when something is easy to get into. It's like there has to be at least levels, you know, that you can reach, and you have to prove something. So no, I don't really know how to explain it to make it not sound icky, if you will.
Sound very like elitist, like we only want the best here. But it's
right.
just true. Like, you don't really want every game that's been published in Steam to be like at a PlayStation conference. There should be some level of quality. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
It's just reality. You know, I know we're running pretty, you know, we're coming up on the 2-hour mark of the podcast.
Yeah.
And I think I would love in the future, maybe we'll have some time to, talk a little bit about our experience seeing the tools matriculate over time, because there is a big difference from the Unity that me and Kyle even made Amber in and the Unity that exists now. It's still, it's
true.
Unity, but it's very much different. and even the unity that existed before me and Kyle started working together. And seeing how Unreal has changed, from, Kismet the blueprints to all these different things. Seeing like some game development engines like RPG Maker have kind of lost prominence in the game developer world because of what what they represent. But, I think we need to spend a little bit more time preparing though on that one, because there's so much to talk about and, be a little bit more focused. But, yeah, I don't know.
I think in a way, Unity has kind of gotten a similar connotation to it as like digital cameras. Because it started off as like, it was the best, most accessible digital camera. If you were interested in photography, interested in game development, you would pick up Unity and you could make some games. You could take some nice looking pictures. You know what I'm saying? But then over time, they've added these things to it that makes it easier and easier to make your picture look better without the quality actually being better, without you actually learning anything, all these automated processes. So now Unity actually has a fully, utilizable, you can just enter into your project, the Cinemachine.
Yeah.
It's like a free camera, like the thing we were just talking about, the learning curve. You can get that for free. In the templates, there's a third-person character controller, a first-person character controller, a complete demo for a first-person shooter, which I'm not knocking these things. I'm just saying it has a similar connotation because those things can be flipped. And so in the same way that being able to just purchase a low-end digital camera but have nice enough pictures doesn't make you a photographer, being able to pick up Unity and you asset flip one of these shouldn't equate to you being a game developer in the way that you can just go ahead and publish it.
Yes. And I don't want to get too deep in this, but it does really create the reason why a lot of games, especially indie level games, are very samey. Is because when you give people access to certain tools that make their lives easier, it also defeats innovation. Because why am I going to make a camera that does something unique, new, or better if I don't have to actually solve the problem? If the problem has already been solved, it just moves and it does the thing that I need. Well, I'm not going to mess with Cinemachine. Also, I don't really understand Cinemachine because it's code that I can't really change. Like,
convoluted.
I'm going to just minimize my game design to reflect what Cinemachine can do, not what I would like to see it do and the capabilities or the possibilities that I'd like to see happen. So I think there's a real deep discussion about how accessibility and the tools that exist in the industry today actually has destroyed game development innovation and has made games essentially like boilerplate. And yeah, there's some cool experiences where people do some cool things, but like that's like the 1% of the 1%, at this point.
Yeah, they're being drowned out.
Yeah. Because back in the day, even for a game to exist on PlayStation, it had to meet some level of competency.
Right. Had to innovate.
The team had to be competent, even if the game was trash. Nowadays, you don't have to have a competent team or a team that understands anything about game design.
Or a team
to make a game and publish it. Like you said, asset flips. We could talk all about that later, but there's so much to say. So we definitely have to do a part 2 where we talk about like how tools have affected the industry and what we've seen over the years. We kind of this was a more personal walk through our time as developers and kind of what has inspired us and what we've seen. But there's so much to talk about. We could talk about game dev for a long time. We'd love, if you're interested in this topic and you're interested in learning more about game dev and experience or things to know about it, please, if you're in the Discord, on our YouTube, on our Facebook, just put something out there and say, I'd love to hear about this aspect of game dev. Because it might be hard to realize this, but me and Kyle have professionally worked in game development. We might not be making games for the Switch or something, but like our actual paycheck has been directly correlated to what we've done in game development,
Yeah. Mine still is. I'm still making learning games.
Kyle is still on it. For me, I'm in a different world now, but we've both spent time where 100% of our focus was game development to some degree. Of course, there's all these other things we have to do with our lives at work, but that's game development. So we could talk about that. What does it look like to be a game dev outside of the gaming industry? That'd be a cool topic for us to cover. There's a lot of stories in that and a lot of crazy things that we've done that I still am like, wow, I can't believe we did that. Or, man, that's just shelves somewhere that nobody will ever see. And then there's this story of the tools and what has created the industry as a whole.
We're kind of scratching the surface in this episode,
really,
man.
Yeah, really. I feel like this episode was important because we laid the groundwork. Because a lot of what we would talk about in the future won't make much sense without your understanding of where we've come from, our understanding. And
that's true.
It would just seem like some dudes just who have an opinion. Like, no, we have experience, not to be rude and talk big, but like, yeah, we can confidently say we know what we're talking about.
Go play Amber on itch.io.
Yes. And then talk to us. I mean, there's a good chance. Oh man, we got to check to see if the Amber, like if it's still running, if you could still log in, that means that the databases still weren't running and it's hosted. I think we removed the WebGL version.
Yeah, you can download it from there. Yeah, I'm pretty sure the WebGL
but I think the database that tracks everything that allows you to log into the game still exists. So yeah,
got to double check that.
We do. We definitely do. So I don't know. Any last words, Kyle, before we wrap up for the day, the evening, the night?
Thanks again for the suggestion.
Yes.
Our faithful Super Agile community. Keep them coming because this is a conversation that made a whole lot of sense for us to have that we didn't necessarily think of. Yeah. And so, if you have any more suggestions, feel free. Leave them in the Discord, in a comment. If you know us personally, just tell us.
Yeah, for real.
But this was a great conversation piece here.
Yeah, I mean, all I have to say is I still love game dev. I might not do it day to day. Actually, I got to talk to you, Kyle. I've been working on something in the dead of the night that only the wifey knows about. And I can't say. I'm not gonna say no more than that. I'll talk to you offline about it. But I definitely have some real plans and some real things that I want to do. So just to get things rolling. But I mean, I love game dev. I love being creative. I mean, I love making this podcast. To me, this scratches some of that itch. Hey, scratch the itch.
Ayo.
But yeah, really, shout out to Marcus, the boy Marcus, for this idea. Appreciate you just asking. Honestly, like Kyle said, like we this is kind of stuff that we might talk about, but like not think to talk about on the podcast. But thanks to our community. Thank you to everybody in the Discord. Of course, thank you to the boy Kyle. Thank you for
always a pleasure
holding it down and showing the world that we don't need Steve. We don't need you, Steve.
We don't need you.
But really, we miss the boy Steve with the energy. Hey, community, convince Steve to become a true game dev. He has it in his spirit, but he does. He just got to step into the world full time, just be in it. But of course, we miss you, Steve. Looking forward to having you back. Hope you're doing well. And of course, thank y'all for just the time for us to share with y'all and listening this far. Shout out to our community. Shout out to the new fans of the show. People who've been listening who are not necessarily a part of the Discord, who are not, necessarily trumpeting themselves. I've met a few people who have been like, oh, I listened to this episode. I've listened to that, and I just appreciate you. Thank you so much for listening. You truly make this all worth it. And we're going to keep on doing this for y'all.
And shout out to the boy Brad, because because you're saying the shout outs, you don't shout out yourself. So I'm gonna shout you out.
Hey, well, thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. It's definitely a blessing to be on this, and I'm thankful for every episode we get a chance to record. It's a true friendship, and I'm thankful for this time. So thank you. So anywho, thank y'all for listening. Thank y'all for being a part of this. Once again, you always know you can catch us on all of the social medias. all of the podcasting sites and platforms. We're on YouTube, we're on Facebook, we're on Spotify, we're on SoundCloud, we're on Apple Podcasts, we're on Google Podcasts, we're on Stitcher. We everywhere. If you don't know where to find us,
we're on your toaster.
On your toaster. If you don't know where to find us, just search our name in Google, Super Agile Bros, and you will find us. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you for your time. We love you guys. And until next time, y'all take it easy. Peace.